And I think after that, it was a bass line. And we tend to do the obvious thing of just thickening everything up with octaves, things in different octaves, which is really obvious thing to do, but it makes such a difference. It makes it a little trickier to mix because suddenly you've got all these broad frequencies in it, but it satisfies more than. And I think especially when you're using plug-in instruments, the sounds are generally a bit thinner. They don't quite have the body because just by their nature they're broken up into bits. So something about them isn't quite as thick and as satisfying as an analog synth. So they do need to be thickened up a lot of the time.
So you're saying you're basically using the same themes on different instruments and on different octaves. So.
And just, I think on this track, the bass line just really follows the movement of the chords. I think we'll generally start with a chord or a bass line. I think for me it's easier to write a chord first and then write a bass line after the chord because it throws up more possibilities. I think I tend to write more cliched kind of bass lines if I start with a bass line itself. And definitely with this track, the emphasis wasn't on the beats. The beat is effectively a breakbeat looping with a few things backing it up. I think the breakbeat on this is a sort of composite beat. I can hear I can't remember it. It's quite an old track, but I think there's Commodore's assembly line break in there, which is the bell, and it's just backed up with some FM percussion off an FS1R, which is that sound you're hearing now. And the beats in that were all kind of made by hand. We tend to write quite a lot of beats nowadays using Logic environments and just generate a kind of spew of MIDI output and then take the best bits out. So we'll record 10 minutes of this generative drum output and then cut out the best bits and make a track out of that. We're quite like the idea of sort of some random elements in the music. And that's basically how that track was made. It really started with the chord and everything else followed. And then right at the end of the track, the chords basically just reverse in time. Which gives it a different feel. Yeah, so the chords at the end there are really just a reversal of the opening chords, a time reversal, which in Logic is really easy to do, and that's the beauty of computers, because I think if I had to do that by hand on a keyboard, I'd have real problems.
Can I just ask a quick question about the break? It's obviously sounded a bit sped up, but how did you process it or EQ it? Or
The break on that, this track was written when we weren't doing all the stuff inside the computer, so it would have been processed through a little EQ compressor box called a Calrec, which is just it's like a channel strip from a desk, but it's a really lovely old sort of English EQ sound. It's very warm, but nowadays it's really just using sort of Logic's own internal compression and manually cutting up the breaks a lot of the time. I know there's a lot of software now that will cut up the breaks for you and kind of and do a lot of that, but it's much more fulfilling to do it by hand and slice it up and jiggle it around like that. And sometimes doing that generative thing with the Logic environments, which I can show you an example of now.
Would you take each, like cut the break up into individual sections like a kick and a snare and then put it on a keyboard and replay it the way you want it to sound, or would you just rearrange it?
Yeah, I think with that one it sounded like the original break formed the sort of basis of the rhythm, of the syncopation, but then we just cut it up so that you've got a bit more. It's a bit more versatile and a bit more flexible, so you can do variation of them fills and things like that. So even if you've got a rhythm you're happy with, I think just cutting it up.
Thanks.
And this is the way we make some beats. There's a track on our last album, which came out in October, it's called Spokes, and there's a track on it called Cedar City. This is where the drums came from, and this is a sort of randomizing drum environment, which just sort of throws out syncopations. And we made it, and it's pretty clunky, and it's enormous, but it sort of does the job. But it takes quite a while to actually set it up, because there's just so many buttons. But the basic principle of it is it does and or if probabilities on each beat, and you've got 16 steps. So it's fairly simple what it does, but it throws out, it does what computers do well, which I think is sort of probability and randomization. I think it's hard for us to actually work in that way. I know my mind doesn't work randomly on purpose. It works randomly quite a lot of the time, but not intentionally. I think computers can do it well. So this is a good way of exploiting that, really. It does tend to sort of throw out stuff that sounds like sort of generic IDM though, but so yeah, basically for each step you have a possibility of 4 different notes or 4 different events. So you could have a kick drum or a snare drum or whatever you like, really. And it will do and or if probabilities. So it'll either play it and something else, or it'll play it or something else. And that's quite an effective way of coming up with syncopations where everything's not playing together, so that the kick and the snare don't necessarily play together and the hats don't play where they shouldn't play. And this one runs through a sort of random delay line as well. And the beauty of this, rather than working in an outside program, is you've still got all the functions of Logic, you've still got the nice plugins and stuff. You could write this in the equivalent of this in Max or something, but it would, for one, be a lot harder, and also you haven't got all the functions of Logic built in. And it is very versatile with Logic, so we tend to do a lot of stuff with this kind of environment now.
So how long does it take you to come up with the whole concept and setup there?
This took about a week to sort of program, and it's a lot of it's sort of object-based programming. It's fairly simple, where it's just written with delay lines and sort of cable switches and very, very simple sort of programming language.
Simple, yet it has to be done, so that's why it takes a lot of time, because you
Yeah,
got many getters and...
It's more the it's the multitude of objects that you have to join up that takes the time. The actual logic behind it is fairly simple. It's fairly straightforward. But once you've written it, you only have to write it once, and you can use it for loads of different things. I mean, you could use this to generate melodies and harmonies as well. It's not really just drum-based, but we tend to use it for drums more than anything.